Basically, yeah, people assume that the edit, I get some editorial edict down from on high saying, we need you to do a story about so-and-so is going to happen and it's going to lead to this big thing and blah, blah, blah. And frankly, you get a lot more leeway than that. I certainly always have. I've always had pretty much complete creative freedom. The only time I don't get what I want is when I want to use a particular character, and that character is off doing something else in that universe. And, like Brian Bendis. Whenever I try and write Nick Fury, it's like, oh no, Bendis has plans for him. Damn it, I really want to write Nick Fury. But okay, yeah, but they'll, they don't tell me what to write, basically. So, for example, with Daredevil, I guess the first thing I did was to figure out what is it that makes this character tick, and what have I got to say with this character that isn't just obvious, frankly. I mean, anybody can sit down and write a basic Daredevil story. It's going to be, a gritty crime story, beating up some bad guys in Hell's Kitchen in New York or whatever. But it's, how do you make it not just generic and rote? I was kind of lucky with the Daredevil situation because I inherited it from Ed Brubaker, who left the character in a very provocative situation. He'd inherited it from Brian Bendis, who had left the character in a very provocative situation too. So basically that makes my job very easy for me. I'm not lost in the fog thinking, what do I do with this character? I've immediately got to deal with the ramifications of, basically there's a bunch of bad guys in Daredevil called the Hand, who are like ninja assassins, and they've chosen the hero to be their new leader. Now, that doesn't really make any sense, because they're assassins and he never kills anyone. Why would, and they're his arch enemy, why would they choose him to be their leader? So the first thing I have to do is figure out a reason for that to make sense. So in that respect, that made my job kind of easy in that, well, my story has to be about that. I have to deal with the ramifications of that. And so I'm not going to spoil it for you, but where the story's going is it turns out there's something else going on behind the scenes which explains the seemingly illogical choice they made. So yeah, so what I do is I'll write a brief email to the editor saying, okay, here's the kind of general direction I want to go in. Does that sound cool to you? And they'll be like, yeah, fine. And then I'll work that up into an outline for a few issues, for like a sort of 5-issue arc. Send it to the editor, knock it back and forth. They'll pass it around at the office. My editor, Steve Wacker, will pass it on to his senior editor, the group editor, Tom Brevoort, and his assistant. And they'll knock it around and they will pull their notes on it. But rather than getting, the worst thing is when you get different notes from different editors. You get like one set of notes from the editor, one set of notes from the editor's boss, and another set of notes from the publisher, and they're all contradictory. And you don't know which way to jump. That's happened very rarely, but it has happened on occasion. Ideally, they will pool their notes, send it back to me as a kind of unified front. And then I just got, like I was saying before about breaking it down. Once you've got the outline, you break the outline down into issues, and then you break the issue down into pages, into scenes, and then you break the scenes down into pages, and then you break the page down into panels. And it's just you can keep halving it and halving it and halving it until and then you realise, oh, we've written it. You get to a point where you don't realise that you've finally got to the final panel, and it's like, oh, it's done, okay, and it's kind of, yeah. Well, everything's been done. You can be paralysed by worrying about being original. This is a terrible thing to say, but I think that originality is less important than quality, frankly. Because let's face it, people have been writing stories since the beginning of recorded history, before recorded history. There's only so many ideas under the sun, once you strip away the window dressing, there's only, people say, oh, there's only 5 stories, or there's only a dozen, or there's only 30, however many it is, there's only a finite number of basic story forms. So, you can be paralysed by thinking, oh no, that's just like something else, that so-and-so is working on a story with a similar premise. Well, you know what, you just do yours better. Being good is more important than being original, I think. Obviously you want to be both. You aspire to be original. I'm not trying to justify, being a rip-off artist. But at the same time, especially when you're working for, like a giant multinational publishing corporation with, a character universe of thousands of characters who've been around for 40 years, battling each other in one way or another without any kind of resolution. After a while, it's kind of like, there's only so many ways to skin a cat, you know what I mean? So yeah, and I guess coming back to your original question of how do I approach it, I could do something wildly off the wall with Daredevil. I could do something unlike any Daredevil story anybody's ever seen before. But there's a point where it's like, well, that's not what the readers are paying for. Your job is to kind of give them what they want, but not the way they expect. And I guess the first thing I do when I approach a character, if it's a company-owned character, the first thing I do is, take a long, hard look at this character. Okay, what is it that makes this guy tick? What is it that makes what genre is it? What are the genre expectations associated with that? What is it? The readers. I guess when you in a genre. Given whether it's a superhero or a mystery or crime or whatever, there's a certain set of expectations to go with that genre. And that genre has its fans. They're reading it because they like that genre, okay? And there's a set of expectations they have that go with that. And if you don't meet those expectations, you're going to have a disappointed reader on your hands. You know, so you want to give them what they want. You know, if they're buying Daredevil, they want a little bit of action, and they want a bit of angst, and they want a bit of gritty crime kind of vibe to it. You know, if I filled it with elves and fairies and unicorns, then they're going to be pissed off. So yeah, so you need to kind of you take a long hard look at it and figure out, okay, what's expected here? How do I give them that, but not the way they expect? How do I make it not just rote genre trappings? I guess with Adam Strange as a character I wrote for DC, is like a rather hokey old 50s character with a jetpack, a sort of Flash Gordon type character. But when I approached that, I just kind of looked at it and thought, okay, what are the set of expectations that go with this? And how can I reinvent it to keep the old school fans happy, the guys who are like fans of the old pulp stuff from the 50s, but also make it relevant and entertaining for a 21st century readership? Like, can I keep both of these sets of fans happy, because they're quite different? So what I tried to do is I tried to boil it down to what's the core of his character, what makes him tick, what's his defining thing. His basic defining gimmick is two things. He's got a jetpack, and he zaps off to this alien planet on the other side of the galaxy where he's got a wife and kids, and then he zaps back again and nobody believes him. So I just basically kept those two defining elements and then threw everything else away and put loads of crazy action in it. I didn't know how the old school fans would react, but I was pleasantly surprised that I seemed to keep both of those sets of fans happy by basically being respectful to the basic, the short list of essential elements for that character, but also doing my own thing with it. And I guess me and Jock did the same thing with Green Arrow Year One. Hands up who's read Green Arrow Year One? A few of you. Okay. Basically, those of you who don't know, Green Arrow is like a DC superhero who's like a Robin Hood type character with a bow and arrow. I was looking around trying to find a DC character to write that would actually sell. So I've been doing Vertigo work for ages, which is satisfying but doesn't sell very well. And most of the DC characters are frankly really hokey. And I thought, who can actually write I can live with myself? And I was looking through the DC encyclopedia, and I saw this Robin Hood guy. And I thought, well, he had like, his outfit had like a little Errol Flynn Robin Hood hat with a feather in it. He looks like an idiot. But there was an old story where he was wearing a hood. I thought, well, that's not so bad. So what's his origin story? And his origin story was he gets trapped on marooned on a tropical island and has to hunt to survive with a bow. And there were bad guys there. And I thought, well, that sounds kind of cool, because I could do that. I've never read a modern version of that story. This is from back in the 40s or 50s. And if I do the origin story, that means there's no hokey supervillains, there's no tights, there's no capes, there's none of that stuff I hate in superhero comics. I can just do it as a straight action genre story, like a First Blood style hunted man in the wild story. So that's how me and Jock approached it. And but at the same time, I'd never read a Green Arrow comic in my life when I first pitched that. And once they said, yeah, you can do it, obviously I went back and did my homework and read the character. But the research I did wasn't so much about the character's history, it was trying to, like I said, find that short list of defining traits that make this guy who he is, that the readers want to see. So, it's about, he's basically the character, because he's a Robin Hood character, he's defined by his social conscience. So I thought, well, okay, the great thing about an origin story is you can give the character an arc. The horrible thing about, mainstream superhero comics is nothing ever really changes, because they've got to be coming back for adventures next month too, and their character is kind of set in stone. Nobody ever really changes because the readers don't want it to change. But when you do an origin story, that's great. You can give him an arc and have it end where he becomes the character that the readers know and love. And that's the point at which I lose interest. That's why I much prefer doing short miniseries and origin stories than ongoing stuff. So I started off by making Oliver Queen, the Green Arrow guy, making him kind of a dick. Because he's defined by a social conscience, I made him a character who's got no social conscience at all. So then through the course of this story, we can actually see him go through that change. And he emerges, by the end of it, the character that the readers know and love. But I would have no interest in writing any more Green Arrow stories, because once he is that guy that the readers know and love, that's kind of where I tune out, frankly. And if you're going to be doing independent work, that's the great thing, because you can have that in every single story you tell. You can have a beginning, middle, and an end, and then you can move on and do the next thing. Show of hands, who wants to do ongoing, long-form storytelling? Okay. Who wants to do just single-issue stories? Who wants to do short mini-series? Okay, it's a fair mix of all three.